welcome to Catoctin Mountain Park, a unit of the National Park Service in Maryland. My name is Ranger Dorothy, and today we're going to take a walk on the charcoal trail and learn about how charcoal was produced in this area in the 1700s and 1800s. Now today we're just doing a quick overview, so we'd like to invite you to come out, visit the park, and take a walk on the trail yourself. It's only half a mile, relatively flat, and it has lots of informative signage. So let's take a walk. So while we're walking in this beautiful forested area, I'd like to start out with some history. This whole area was pretty much uninhabited before the 1720s. Some different Native American groups would come through to gather rhyolite, which is a kind of stone that was used for projectile points and other sharp implements, or they would come up here to hunt, but they didn't have any permanent towns or camps in the area. In the 1720s, German and Swiss immigrants came. Many of them were farmers, but many of them were also skilled tradespeople, like tanners, blacksmiths, shoemakers, even watchmakers. So the town that we know today as Thurmont was originally called
Mechanics Town
because of all of these mechanical trades. Another industry that began to grow in
Mechanics Town
and in Maryland in general was the iron industry. In the 1750s, iron ore was discovered in the region, and England said, "Hey colonies, why don't you smelt that iron and send it to England so we can use it to make finished goods?" Now, smelting involves melting the usable iron out of the stone that surrounds it, so you need a lot of heat to do that, which is where the charcoal comes in to produce that heat. There were 8 iron furnaces in Maryland by the time of the American Revolution, and one of them was just 5 miles down the road from where we are right now, the Catoctin Iron Furnace. And before the Revolution, this furnace would send pig iron, or unfinished iron bars, to England, but as the Revolution started, they began producing cannonballs and pots for the war effort. Charcoal is created by essentially slow cooking wood. So the sign that's behind me discusses how the wood was harvested for the charcoal industry. Now, burning or simmering the wood at a low temperature for a long amount of time removes the sap, the bugs, and other impurities that might be present in the wood. So the end result, the charcoal, is basically pure carbon, and it burns at a hotter and steadier temperature than the wood that it comes from. So the wood that you're seeing around us, the trees here today, are part of the second growth, because this whole area was logged. Everything that is now Catoctin Mountain Park and Cunningham Falls State Park was used for fuel for the charcoal industry. The trees that are here today have been growing for the past 100 or 200 years and are currently maple, oak, sassafras, walnut. 200 years ago, it would have been different. Either they would have been cut down or they would have been American chestnut trees. Using only an axe, a saw, and other manual tools, a woodcutter could produce 2 cords of wood per day. A cord is a measurement of wood that's about 4 feet tall, 4 feet wide, and 8 feet long. I don't know about you, but I would need a chainsaw to produce even 1 cord of wood in a day. After the wood was cut, it had to be hauled from the tree down to the site where it would be turned into charcoal. I'm standing in front of a model of a wood hauling sled, but we also have some historical photos to show you. Now, these contraptions were built with sleds instead of wheels because the rocky and rooty terrain is not friendly to wheels and axles. They would be hauled using a pair of horses or donkeys, and they each carried about half a cord of wood, so about 4 feet by 4 feet by 4 feet. Now, each hearth, the structure that turns the wood into charcoal, would take about 30 to 50 cords of wood. So that means 60 to 100 trips from the tree to the site using one of these sleds. Next, we're going to take a look at an example of what a hearth site would have looked like. So load up your sleds and follow me. I'm standing in a roughly circular cleared area that shows about the size that a charcoal hearth would be, about 30 feet in diameter. This model is built with dead wood, but of course, a real one would be built with freshly cut wood. The collier, which is the name for someone who makes charcoal, would first insert a tall pole to be used as a chimney and then stack those 4-foot lengths of wood around it. Now the first layer would be called the foot, the second layer would be called the waist, and the top layer would be called the head. If we set fire to a big, beautiful 12-foot tall pile of wood, we'd have a pretty cool bonfire, but we wouldn't have charcoal at the end. So in order to produce the long and slow and low temperature of the charcoal fire, the collier would need to control how much oxygen accessed the wood. He would do this by putting a layer of dirt and leaves over the top of the hearth that creates kind of an insulating blanket that stops extra oxygen from getting in. He could then control the oxygen flow by punching holes in it or by adding an extra layer to prevent more oxygen from getting in. Our next stop is going to be a model of what the hearth looks like with this insulating layer of leaves and dirt. Unfortunately, the charcoal hearth model that should be on this trail is under construction. Luckily, we do have a small model at the visitor center, so we can show you what the hearth looked like. The hearth would be lit by dropping a burning branch or some coals from the cooking fire into that chimney that we had left open. The collier and his assistants would monitor it 24 hours a day for the 10 to 14 days that it took to come to foot, or for the fire to go all the way down to the bottom of the hearth. Now, this was a dangerous job and involved being very close to fire, even climbing on top of the hearth and looking for soft spots, which is called jumping the stack. The collier and his assistants would split these jobs, but they would be watching 5 to 10 hearths between the 2 to 3 of them. Now, they had to live nearby. They couldn't just go down into town to spend the night. They would have to be called out if the assistant says, hearth number 7 is on fire. The collier would be ready to pop out and address the situation. Once they had come to a foot, they would rake the dirt and leaves off of the hearths and spread the charcoal into smaller piles for it to fully cool before being brought down to the furnace. The collier would only be paid on delivery, so if any of these piles of charcoal burst into flames and only ash was left, he would not get paid for that work. So this is an example of the 5-star accommodation that the collier and his assistants would stay in during their time making charcoal up on the mountain. As you can see, it's built of wood and branches, maybe branches that were too small for the charcoal hearths, and only about big enough for one person to lie down, maybe 2 if they were good friends. In fact, this actually looks a lot like a charcoal hearth. It's just slightly more pointed at the top. If you look through the hut, you can see that there is a stone area. That was the collier's kitchen. Because these huts were built out of natural and local materials, the wood and the leaves would be scattered and decompose after use, so the cooking stones were the only clue that archaeologists found. Using these piles of stones with some cooking residue or cooking marks on them, archaeologists have been able to find 140 different charcoal hearth and collier hut sites in Catoctin Mountain Park. Charcoal was last made on this mountain in 1873, when the iron furnace down the hill transitioned from charcoal to coal as its fuel source. Changing technologies, like canals and railroads, made it easier and cheaper to bring coal from out west than to produce charcoal here in the mountains. The mountains were used by private owners as farms and for sawmill purposes for a while, before, in the 1930s, the federal government purchased the area and turned it into Catoctin National Recreation Demonstration Area. The Civilian Conservation Corps and Works Progress Administration turned some of those old logging roads into the trails, including the one that we walked on today. Today, you'll see people climbing boulders, people hiking and looking for birds, families playing, and even people riding horses. It's very different from the Catoctin Mountain of 200 years ago, where you would have heard the sounds of sawing, axes chopping, horses and mules hauling, and smelled the smoke from the charcoal hearths. Thank you for coming on this virtual tour with us. We hope you'll come to the park and visit yourself. This trail is a wonderful, short trail, even for those who are not familiar with a lot of hiking, and there is more information on the signs and displays than I shared today. Have a wonderful day.